The room was warm and golden and full of people clapping for a lie. I was standing near the back of the hospital atrium, close to the tall glass wall where the winter dark pressed in, holding a thin leather folder against my chest, like it might keep me warm. On the little stage at the front, under a soft white light, my stepfather. Gerald lifted the microphone, smiled his easy smile, and said, 10 years ago. I looked at the children's ward of this hospital, and I decided we could do better. The crowd made that low, appreciative sound a crowd makes. My mother, 3 rows from the front, pressed her hand to her heart. And I stood there, 31 years old, in the only good dress I owned. And I felt the floor tilt very slightly under my feet. Because 10 years ago, Gerald had not looked at anything. 10 years ago, that ward had been mine. I should tell you how it began, because the beginning is the part nobody in that room knew. When I was 19, my little brother Sam spent 11 nights in that same children's ward with a chest infection that would not clear. Our family had almost no money then. I remember the ward in January. The radiators that ticked but never quite warmed. The other parents dozing in plastic chairs. A boy across the hall who had no visitors at all. I remember a nurse named Colette bringing that boy a spare blanket from a cupboard that was nearly empty and apologizing to him quietly, as if the emptiness were her fault. Something in me set hard that night. I was 19 and broke and frightened for my brother. But I decided, in the stubborn way you decide things at 19, that I would not let that cupboard stay empty. So I started small, the way real things start. I put a cardboard box in the break room of the supermarket where I worked and taped a handwritten sign to it. Blankets, warm socks, small toys, anything for the children's ward. People filled it. I carried the first load in on the bus, 2 garbage bags of soft things on my lap. And Colette met me at the ward doors and cried a little, which made me cry, and then we both pretended we hadn't. That was it. That was the whole grand founding of the thing that Gerald would one day call his idea. A box, a bus, and a nurse who cried. There was no board, no cameras, no man in a good suit. There was only a girl who had seen an empty cupboard and could not unsee it. For the first 3 years, it stayed that small and that quiet. I gave it a plain name, the Warm Ward Fund, and I kept the records in a school notebook because I could not afford anything else. Every coin, every donated coat, every $20 bill folded into my collection tin outside the pharmacy on Saturdays. I wrote down who gave, and I wrote down where it went. Because Colette taught me that if you touch other people's kindness, you have to be able to show exactly where every scrap of it landed. I did not know then how much that habit would matter. I only knew that a notebook with honest numbers in it felt like a clean thing to hold. My handwriting is small and even, and I dated every single page. My mother married Gerald when I was 22. I want to be fair to him, because being unfair would make me no better than he turned out to be. So here is the fair part. Gerald was warm. He filled a room. He remembered the names of waiters and asked about their children. At the wedding, he danced with my grandmother until she laughed like a girl. And I remember thinking, my mother has been lonely for a long time. And here is a man who is never lonely, and maybe some of that will rub off on her. He was good at being liked. I did not yet understand that being liked and being good are 2 different currencies, and that a man can be very rich in one and completely bankrupt in the other. It was my mother, not Gerald, who first pulled him toward the fund. She was proud of me in her own anxious way, and she mentioned my little charity to him, the way you mention a child's science project, half boast and half apology. Gerald lit up. "You're doing what?" he said, turning the full warm beam of his attention on me across the dinner table. "That's marvelous. That's exactly the sort of thing this family should be known for." I was young enough and hungry enough for a father's approval that the word family went straight through me like sun. I did not hear the other word, known. He did not say the sort of thing this family should do. He said known for. I would replay that dinner many times in the years to come, and every time I heard the word land a little more clearly. At first, his help was real, and I was grateful for it. Gerald had a phone full of numbers I did not have. He knew a man who owned a printing shop and got our first proper flyers made for free. He knew the fellow who booked the community hall and got us a Saturday for our first indoor collection drive. He was, in those early days, genuinely useful, and I told everyone so. When the local radio did a 2-minute segment on the Warm Ward Fund, I asked Gerald to speak on it because he was better on his feet than I was, and I stood outside the little studio and felt lucky. Actually lucky to have a stepfather who wanted to lift up the thing I loved. That is the part that still stings. I handed him the microphone the first time. I taught him how to hold it, but I kept doing the work. This is the fact that no story about Gerald can erase, and the fact I clung to on the worst nights. I did the spreadsheets. I did the phone calls to the hospital supply office to find out exactly what the ward needed each season, because needs change. And a good fund does not just dump blankets on people, it asks. I wrote the thank you letters, hundreds of them, in my small, even hand, to every donor who gave more than a few dollars. I built the relationships with the ward staff over years of showing up on ordinary Tuesdays when there was no event, no camera. No reason to be there, except that the children were still there. Gerald appeared for the bright moments. I lived in the long gray stretches between them, and the long gray stretches are where charity actually happens. The first real clue that something was wrong came in the 5th year, and it came in newsprint. Our town paper ran a small feature on local giving, and there was a photograph of Gerald standing in the hospital lobby with his arms crossed and his chin lifted, and beneath it, the caption read, "Gerald Haunts, founder of the Warm Ward Fund, which has served the children's ward for 5 years. Founder." I read the word standing at the kitchen counter in my coat, my keys still in my hand. And I felt something cold slide down through the middle of me. I was not in the photograph. My name was not in the article. 5 years of my notebook, my bus rides, my crying nurse. And the paper of record for my own town had just told everyone that a man who joined in year 3 had founded the whole thing in a year he was not even present for. I brought the paper to my mother that evening, folded to the photograph, and I laid it on her table without a word. She read it. I watched her face do the thing it always did when Gerald was the subject, the small softening, the getting ready to explain. "Oh, honey," she said. "You know how these papers are. They get things a bit wrong." He didn't write it. No, I said he didn't write it, but he gave the interview, and he let them call him the founder. And he could have said one sentence. He could have said, "The young woman who started this is my stepdaughter," and he chose not to. My mother folded the paper back up along its crease, very neatly, and slid it toward me. And she said the sentence I would come to hate more than any other. "Don't make a fuss. It's for a good cause. Does it really matter whose name is on it as long as the children are helped?" I have thought about that sentence for years.
On its surface, it sounds almost holy, doesn't it? Does it matter whose name is on it? It is the sentence people use to shame you out of asking for what is yours, and it works because it dresses theft up as humility. Here is what I eventually understood, and what I wish I had understood at 24 instead of 31. The name matters, not because of vanity, but because the name is the truth. And a fund built on charity should not be built on a lie. If Gerald was the founder in the newspaper, then Gerald was the one people would call when a big donor wanted to talk. And Gerald was the one who would decide where the money went. And I, the actual founder, would slowly be edited out of my own life's work. The name was never about pride. The name was about who held the wheel. So I did the only thing that felt like solid ground under me. I kept better records. Not out of some brilliant plan for revenge. I promise you, I had no plan. But because keeping records was the one thing I knew how to do, and the one thing that was entirely mine. I moved the notebook into a proper accounting file. I saved every email. When a donor wrote to me directly, and many did, because I was the one who answered them for a decade, I kept those letters, dated and filed. When the hospital's supply office confirmed a delivery, I saved the confirmation with the date. I was not building a case. I was just being the kind of person my nurse Colette had taught me to be. The kind who can always show exactly where every scrap of kindness landed. But a truthful record, kept long enough, becomes something else. It becomes proof, whether you meant it to or not. The years went on, and Gerald grew into the role he had cast for himself. He stopped calling it the Warm Ward Fund and started calling it In Front of Others, My Little Project, and then our foundation. And finally, by year 8, simply the work I do at the hospital. Each phrase moved the ownership another inch. At family dinners, he would tell the story of the founding, and the story had changed. Now, there had been a moment, a vision, a night when he stood in the children's ward and decided we could do better. He had taken my January night, my ticking radiators, my empty cupboard, and he had put himself inside it, standing where I had stood. I would sit at the table and listen to a man narrate my own memory back to me with himself as the hero, and I learned a strange, quiet skill, which is how to keep your face perfectly still while something is being stolen from inside your chest. There is a small thing I have never told anyone, and I will tell you now because you have listened this far. In the 6th year, I nearly gave the whole thing up. Not because of the work. The work I loved. I nearly gave it up because of a single afternoon at a fundraising lunch, where a wealthy woman I had spent weeks writing to, coaxing, thanking, finally agreed to make a very large gift. I had done all of it. Every letter, every follow-up call. But at the lunch, she rose to shake a hand, and it was Gerald's. Hand she reached for, because Gerald was the name she knew. And she said, in front of everyone, how moved she was by his vision. I sat there smiling with my letters in my bag and felt myself disappear in real time. That night, I told Colette I was done. She was old by then and tired, and she took both my hands in hers and said, "The children don't care whose name it is, love. But you keep your records anyway. One day they'll care, and you'll be glad you did." I kept my records. She was the second person to tell me that, and the only one who was right about why. I want to tell you about one Tuesday, because it is the kind of day that never makes it into anyone's speech. It was a wet, gray Tuesday in the 9th year. There was no event. I drove to the hospital after my shift with a car full of the small, unglamorous things the ward had asked for that month. Humidifier filters, non-slip socks in the smallest sizes, a box of the particular soft-spined books that survive being chewed by toddlers. I carried them up myself, 4 trips, my hair dripping. Colette had retired by then, but her replacement, a young nurse named Danielle, met me at the doors the way Colette used to. A boy in the 3rd bed, maybe 6 years old, watched me stack the books and asked if I was the book lady. I said I supposed I was. He said, "Do you come every week?" And I said, "Just about," and nodded like that was the most normal thing in the world. That there should simply be a book lady who comes just about every week. Gerald has never met that boy. Gerald has never carried a box up 4 flights in the rain. But Gerald is the founder. The midpoint of this story, the moment the ground truly shifted, came in the 10th year when the hospital announced it was building a permanent children's wing. It was a large project, funded partly by the region and partly by a decade of community giving. And the Warm Ward Fund was to be folded into it as a named legacy. There would be a proper dedication. And, the hospital said in its bright announcement letter, there would be a permanent donor wall in the new atrium, with a central engraved plaque honoring the individual whose vision and sustained effort had made the children's ward giving possible over the past 10 years. When I read that letter, I felt, for one foolish minute, purely happy. A wall, a plaque. 10 years honored in brass that would outlast all of us. And then I read the letter again, and I understood, with a slow, sick certainty, exactly whose name Gerald intended to have carved into it. He did not tell me. That was the thing that finally broke something loose in me, that he did not even tell me. I found out at a family dinner, in the way you find out the temperature has dropped from the general feel of the room. Gerald was expansive that night, refilling glasses, and he mentioned, as if it were a small thing, that he had been in several meetings with the hospital board about the dedication, and that the Wing's Development Committee was very keen to recognize the family's leadership. My mother beamed. My aunt asked what he would wear. And I sat very still and asked in the lightest voice I could manage whether the plaque had a name on it yet. Gerald smiled at me, warm as ever, and said, "They wanted one clear name, sweetheart. For the donors, you understand. It's cleaner that way." One clear name. He said it as gently as if he were doing me a kindness, sparing me the burden of my own decade. That night, I did not sleep. But somewhere in the long, dark hours, my panic burned down into something steadier. And I understood that the betrayal was bigger than I had let myself see. It was not just a newspaper caption anymore, not just a phrase at dinner. Gerald had been in rooms I had never been invited into. He had been talking to the hospital board, to the donors, to the people who decided such things, and he had been telling them, for who knows how long, that he was the origin of all of it. The plaque was only the final stone in a wall he had been building, quietly for years, a wall between me and the thing I had made. And the worst part, the part that made me sit up in the dark, was the realization that if that plaque went up with his name, it would become the official truth. Brass does not argue. In 50 years, when everyone who remembered the box on the bus was gone, the wall would still say Gerald, and the wall would win. The next morning, I did something I had never done in 10 years. I contacted the hospital directly, not through Gerald, and asked to speak to whoever was managing the dedication. I told myself I only wanted to understand the process. that was half true. The other half, the half I did not say out loud, was that I wanted just once to be a name in that building on my own account. I was put through to a woman named Priya Anand, the wing's development officer. And I gave my name and explained, a little stiffly, that I had been involved with the Warm Ward Fund for some years and wanted to understand how the donor wall would work. There was a pause on the line, papers moving. And then Priya said in a careful, puzzled voice, "I'm sorry, could you say your name again?" I said it again. Another pause. "You're the one who signs the ward thank you letters," she said slowly. "I have a whole folder of them. I always assumed you were staff." That was the moment the thread I had been pulling on for a decade finally came loose in my hand. Priya, it turned out, had been at the hospital for 3 years, and in those 3 years, every single piece of real correspondence, every thank you letter, every seasonal needs list, every delivery confirmation had crossed her desk with my name on it, not Gerald's. She had built a picture of the fund from the paperwork, and in her picture, the person who actually ran it was a woman named in the letters. A woman she had assumed was a hospital employee, because who else would do all that unglamorous work? And yet, the man who came to the board meetings, the man the donors knew, the man whose name was being engraved, was Gerald Hauntz. Priya was not a foolish woman. On the phone, I heard her go very quiet as 2 pictures that had never touched before slid together in her mind and did not match. We talked for almost an hour that first time, Priya and I, and slowly the shape of what Gerald had done came clear. He had not simply let a newspaper make a mistake. Over 3 years of board meetings, he had told a consistent story. He had described the founding night as his. He had spoken of building the donor relationships myself, when in truth, those relationships lived in a folder of letters signed by me. He had once, Priya recalled with a wince, corrected a board member who referred to the woman who runs the ward fund, saying warmly, "You mean my late-blooming project?" "Yes, I keep it going. My late-blooming project." He had a phrase ready for every crack, a charming little sentence to paper over the space where I should have been. And the board, busy people with good intentions, had never had a reason to check, because who lies about charity? Who stands in a hospital and claims a decade of another person's quiet kindness as his own? It is such a strange, small, cold thing to do that decent people simply do not think to look for it. She asked me, gently, if I would be willing to send her copies of my records. Not to cause trouble, she said, but because the hospital had a duty to. Get a permanent dedication right, and she was, in her words, no longer confident we have. I said I would. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with 10 years spread out in front of me, the school notebook with its small dated pages, the accounting file, the hundreds of donor letters, the delivery confirmations, the very first blurry photo Colette had taken of me at the ward doors holding 2 garbage bags of blankets, dated on the back in Colette's own hand. I made careful copies of all of it. I did not add a single word of accusation. I did not need to. I had learned long ago that the truth does not need to be loud if it is complete. I packaged 10 honest years, and I sent them to Priya, and then I did the hardest thing, which was to wait, and to say nothing to Gerald, and to go to the dedication. The dedication was held on a cold, clear evening in the new atrium, which smelled of fresh paint and cut flowers. The donor wall stood at the far end, under a soft gray curtain, waiting to be unveiled. My mother had bought a new dress for the occasion, and Gerald wore a suit I had never seen. And in the car on the way there, he practiced his speech under his breath, and my mother told him it was wonderful. And I sat in the back seat with my thin leather folder on my lap, the folder that held a duplicate of everything I had sent Priya. And I said nothing at all. I had decided I would not fight for the microphone. I had spent 10 years learning that fighting Gerald for the spotlight only made me look like the jealous one, the difficult one, the one who could not just be happy the children were helped. So I would not fight. I would simply be present and let the truth, which I had put into safer hands than my own, do whatever it was going to do. Which brings us back to the beginning, to the warm golden room and the man on the stage claiming my January night as his own. 10 years ago, Gerald said, I looked at the children's ward of this hospital, and I decided we could do better. The applause rolled. My mother pressed her hand to her heart. I stood at the back by the dark glass and held my folder, and for one terrible moment, I thought, this is how it ends. He is going to say it, and they are going to believe it, and the curtain is going to fall, and my name is going to be nowhere. Gerald spread his arms. He thanked the board. He thanked the donors. He thanked generously my dear wife for standing beside me through this journey. He did not thank me. He had, at some point in his own story, edited me out so completely that I was not even a footnote in the tale of my own life's work. And then, still smiling, he gestured to Priya, who was standing by the curtain. And he said, "And now, the moment we've all waited for." Priya stepped forward, and I saw her glance once, quickly, toward the back of the room, toward me, and I understood that whatever was about to happen, she had not left it to chance. She took a small microphone of her own. "Before we unveil the wall," she said, and her voice was pleasant and absolutely steady, "the hospital would like to say a word about how a dedication like this is decided, because we take the permanent record very seriously. A donor wall is not just a thank you. It is the history of this place, carved to outlast all of us. So when we prepared this dedication, we did what we always do. We went back through 10 years of records to confirm exactly whose sustained effort built this legacy." I saw Gerald's smile hold, but his eyes moved just slightly. The way a man's eyes move when the ground he is standing on makes a sound he did not expect. "We read the thank you letters," Priya went on, unhurried. 10 years of them. We read the seasonal needs lists sent to our supply office, the delivery confirmations, the donor correspondence. We looked at who answered the donors, who tracked the needs of this ward season after season, who showed up on the ordinary days when no one was watching. And I want to be very clear tonight, because a permanent wall deserves clarity. All of that work over all 10 years was signed by one hand. Let that sit for a moment in the warm, bright room. The board and I are honored to correct our own earlier assumptions and to dedicate this wall to the woman who founded the Warm Ward Fund with a cardboard box on a bus at 19 years old, and who has quietly carried it ever since. And she said my name. The curtain came down. I want you to understand that no one pulled it dramatically. A young man in a hospital polo simply drew the cord, the way he had been told to, and the gray cloth slid away and pooled on the floor. The donor wall was beautiful. Hundreds of small names of every person who had given, arranged like a field of stars. And in the center, on a plaque of warm engraved brass, catching the gala, Light was a single dedication with my name at the top of it, and beneath my name the words, "In memory of an empty cupboard," and beside the plaque, framed, the blurry photograph Colette had taken of a 19-year-old girl at the ward doors holding 2 garbage bags of blankets. Priya had used the photo. She had found, in 10 years of paper, the one image that told the whole truth in a single frame. And she had put it on the wall where brass would keep it forever. The room did not gasp the way rooms do in films. It did something quieter, and to me, far more powerful. It turned. Hundreds of faces turned from the plaque to Gerald, standing frozen at the microphone, with his arms still half raised, and then, slowly, they began to search the crowd. Because Priya had said a name, and the name was not his, and people wanted to find the face that went with it. My mother turned, too. I watched her read the plaque and read the photograph, and I watched 10 years of a story she had told herself come apart in her eyes. She knew that girl in the garbage bag photo. She had bought her that January coat. There are some truths a mother cannot argue with, and her own daughter, at 19, carrying blankets on a bus, is one of them. Gerald, to his credit, or maybe just to his instinct, tried. He leaned back into the microphone and gave a little laugh and said, "Well, of course, it was always a family effort. And I've always been so proud of..." But Priya, still holding her own microphone, said mildly, without any cruelty at all, "It was one person's effort for the first 3 years, Mr. Hans, before you had met the family. The records are quite clear on the dates." My small, even handwriting, dated on every single page for 10 years, the habit a crying nurse had taught a frightened girl, had just closed a door that no amount of charm could open. Gerald's mouth worked for a second. And then he did the only thing left to a man whose only currency is being liked in a room that has just stopped liking him. He set the microphone down, very gently, and he stepped back from the light. I did not go up. This is the part people always expect, that I would stride to the front and take the microphone and have my moment. But I had learned that a moment you take can be doubted, while a truth that is simply revealed cannot. I stayed at the back by the dark glass. It was Priya who found me, walking through the parting crowd, and she did not make a speech of it either. She just stopped in front of me and put out her hand and said quietly, "I'm sorry it took us 10 years to read our own letters." I shook her hand. My eyes were stinging, but I did not let them spill. Not there. And a strange thing happened around us, which was that people I had never met began to come up, 1 and 2 at a time. Donors and nurses and parents, and they did not congratulate me exactly. They said things like, "You're the book lady," and "My son was in the ward in the winter." Was that you? I always wondered who wrote those letters. They were so kind. 10 years of quiet work, coming back to me not as applause, but as recognition, which is a warmer and rarer thing. Danielle, the young nurse, was there too, and she found me before my mother did. She was still in her scrubs. She had come straight up from a shift, because Priya had quietly told her what the wall would say. She stood in front of me, and her chin was trembling, and she said, "I gave your name to the board myself, months ago. I told them it was you who came every Tuesday. I didn't know if they listened." I told her they had listened in the end, and I meant it as thanks. But she shook her head like it wasn't enough. And then she hugged me. Hard and fast, the way tired people hug when they mean it. and went back to her ward because the children were still there, and someone had to be. That is charity, I thought, watching the doors swing shut behind her. Not the plaque, the going back through the doors. My mother found me last. She came through the thinning crowd with her new dress and her ruined face. And she stood in front of me and could not at first find any words at all. Then she said, "I told you not to make a fuss." I nodded. "I know," I said. She looked at the plaque across the room, at the girl in the photograph, at the daughter she had told for a decade that it did not matter whose name was on it. "It mattered," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. "It mattered, and I told you it didn't." I could have said a great many things then. I had rehearsed some of them, in the dark, over the years. But standing there, I found I did not want any of them. I just said, "It's all right, Mom." And it half was. Not because she had earned it, but because I had decided a long time. I vowed to myself that day that I would not let Gerald's smallness make me small too. Here is the quiet justice, the part I want you to hold on to, because it is not the part with the curtain. In the weeks after the dedication, nothing dramatic happened to Gerald. He was not ruined. There was no scanding in the paper, no shouting, no reckoning at a dinner table. What happened was smaller, and I think far more just. The hospital corrected its records, permanently, in brass. The paper that had once called him the founder ran a quiet follow-up, this time with the true story and the true name. The donors, who are not fools, began to send their questions and their gifts. To me directly, because Priya had shown them who had actually done the work. And people prefer to give their kindness to the hand that will spend it honestly. Gerald was not punished. He was simply, gently, no longer believed. And for a man whose entire fortune was being believed, that turned out to be the only justice that could ever really touch him. He and my mother are still married. I still see them at holidays. Gerald is quieter now at family dinners. He does not tell the founding story anymore because everyone at the table has stood in front of that wall. He is polite to me, carefully polite. The way you are careful with a person who once held a truth you tried to steal and did not use it to destroy you when she easily could have. Sometimes I catch him looking at me across a room with an expression I have never been able to fully name. Part resentment, part something almost like respect. The grudging respect of a man who spent his life being liked, for a woman who spent her life being true, and who has just learned, too late, which currency actually buys a place on the wall. I went back to the hospital a few weeks ago, on an ordinary wet Tuesday with a car full of humidifier filters and small non-slip socks, because the ward still needs them, and the work is still mostly quiet and gray and unseen, which is exactly how I like it. I carried the boxes up myself. On my way out, I stopped in the new atrium, in front of the donor wall, and I looked at the field of little star names. All those ordinary people who filled a cardboard box on a bus. I looked at the brass plaque and at the blurry photograph of a girl at the ward doors. And I stood there for a while in the empty evening light. A cleaner was working nearby, a woman about my age, and she followed my gaze to the wall and said, "It's a nice story, that one. My mom told me about the girl who started it with a box. A nice story. Told mother to daughter, the way true things should travel. That, more than the plaque, more than the curtain, more than my mother's ruined face, is the thing I built." So here is what I would say to you, whoever you are, listening to this in your kitchen or your car
or the dark of your own long night. Do the quiet work anyway.
Do it when no one is watching and no one is thanking you. And
a louder, warmer person is standing where you should be standing, taking the microphone you handed him. Keep your honest records, not as weapons, but because the truth kept faithfully for long enough becomes a light that no one can turn off. Being liked is a bright, fast, borrowed thing. Being true is slow and cold and mostly unseen, right up until the moment the curtain falls. And when it does, it will not be your voice that names you. It will be 10 years of small, dated pages, and a nurse who once cried at a set of doors, and a wall of brass that does not know how to lie. Do the quiet work. Sign your own name to it, honestly, and let the wall keep the rest.